Middle of the 18th century. The town of Bacharach on the Rhine. The birth of a musical girl famous for her genius. The young girl had a birthmark on her shoulder that looked like a butterfly. Even the nuns at St. Thomas came to give their blessing. My name is Layla. I was born in a small town on the Rhine. By the age of 16, I was fluent in music and most of the instruments I played. I was born into a famous musical family. My father was a conductor. My mother was a cellist. I grew up playing with my father at all the major concert venues. I'm the youngest pianist in the band. That was the first time I saw Daniel. A very pretty blonde boy. He played violin in my father's orchestra. When my father led him to me, his eyes are like a lake without waves.
Layla, this is Daniel. You'll be playing together from now on.
Hello, Daniel. My name is Layla.
Hello, I am Daniel.
I reached out and took his hand, and his hand was cold and clammy. We'll be partners from now on. Nice to meet you. Daniel looked at me calmly. Most of the time, Daniel's like an expressionless puppet. But when he's playing the violin, there will be very unusual and strong feelings. When he's not practicing, he sits alone in the piano room and stares. And I watched Daniel's back and stared. I snuck up behind him and watched him. Feather quill in hand, writing something on a parchment scroll. Daniel's still like a calm, unruffled lake. Daniel has long eyelashes and pale skin. But he seems to hate the sun. Would you like to take a walk in the garden?
I don't want to go.
You seem to dislike the sun a lot. Have you practiced chapter 12 of the recital?
No, we can practice now.
Daniel looked at me for a moment of contemplation and took the violin off her back. I walked to the piano bench in silence. I ran my fingertips over the keys. I love watching Daniel play the violin. He doesn't even look like an emotionless puppet when he plays the violin. When Daniel was playing the violin, I'm watching him on the sly. After the song, I feel my eyes getting wet. I reached up and touched my eye and a tear slid down from it. Daniel looked at me and said nothing. After a long time, he took out a handkerchief and wiped away my tears. I used to squat in the flower room and compose songs. I think the hanging orchids hanging down from the bower would look vibrant in the sunlight. I'm not a vibrant person, and neither is Daniel. That's why I love all things vibrant. Except for Daniel. I wrote very many songs for Daniel. Daniel playing in the moonlight. Playing the fiddle. Elegant and beautiful. Like an oil painting. I sat on the edge of the fountain with my skirt, holding the parchment and taking notes over and over again.
What are you writing?
I'm composing.
What it written about?
I write about everything. Contents were various, Daniel. Come with me. I held out my hand toward Daniel, who looked at me with an obscure gaze. Still, he slowly extended his hand. I dragged him down the quiet corridors. The high heels made a thumping sound, complete with a cover for my heartbeat. I lifted the lid and sat down. Daniel was standing next to me. He didn't have a look on his face. In the quiet of the night, no one cared about the melodious sound of the piano. I'll be like every songwriter, recording Daniel and me.
It's a good tune.
Do you hear me, Daniel?
Well, your feelings are strong.
So you.
It's late, Layla, you should get some rest.
Daniel dodged my outstretched hand toward him without a trace. I looked at Daniel in disbelief. From the first time I met Daniel to now, it's been more than 10 years. Daniel never seemed to change much, whether it was his appearance or his calm, unruffled eyes. I was there when he wasn't looking. Quickly to his lips. I kissed him without his consent. His lips were cold and he had a very sharp tooth. Out of panic, he accidentally bit me. Daniel tasted my blood. His eyes went from lake blue to red. He pushed me away, and I stumbled on the piano.
Layla? I'm sorry.
He left in a hurry. It wasn't that I hadn't thought that Daniel might not be ordinary. But I didn't think he was a vampire. No wonder his skin is always cold and bloodless. One afternoon, I quietly pushed open a small crack in the door of Daniel's room as the sun was going down. I saw Daniel asleep in there. I walked in softly, watched him quietly, and wept watching him. I've done hundreds of songs for Daniel, documenting everything about Daniel. Also put the emotions that I couldn't express into the without temperature of the notes. My feelings for Daniel are well known. Dad can't do anything about it. He can't force Daniel, much less me. I have a subtle and intense way of expressing my love.
How many did you write?
Daniel looked somewhat helplessly at the parchment that covered the wooden floor. Too many to count, very more. I smile at him. We've been playing together since we were very young. He's an excellent violinist. I'm a pianist. Not only are we great musical partners, but he's my emotional muse. At night I sit in the garden gallery. Now I'm over 40. No longer a young maiden. Daniel was standing behind me, and he still hadn't changed at all. He looks young and beautiful forever. I've been unmarried all my life. I've been composing music all my life. It's like my whole life is reserved for Daniel. Daniel leaned over and hugged me. He wept in front of me.
Layla.
I hugged him back. We didn't get married because of our status, and didn't publicize the relationship. Daniel made up a garland of flowers for me out of nowhere. He put the wreath in my hair. I'm not young enough for this pretty garland. I took it down and smiled at him. He sat on the edge of my bench and pressed my hand. Put the wreath back on my head.
Layla, you will always be my maiden.
When I was a teenager, you would only hide from me. Unfortunately, I'm only human. Daniel wrapped her arms around me and I felt something cold on my neck. I know he's crying again. I've picked up the pace of my compositions. I'm constantly working day and night in the piano room. I've written hundreds of songs for Daniel. But I'm human. Daniel's a vampire. Our love is not destined to end. In my spare time, I still like to sit in the sun in the flower room. Sometimes Daniel comes to stay with me and sometimes doesn't. I stayed quiet on the bench, feeling the loss of life. I feel as if time is running out. A lot of times I sit quietly. Daniel was different. He used to look at me and cry. I'm slowly getting it. Why did Daniel choose to avoid me in the first? It's too painful for him. Daniel. I took all the songs I'd written and laid them out in front of him. I wrote these for you. It's all about you. Daniel hugged the sheet music and cried. I regret it. I bow my head. Daniel looked at me and didn't say anything. I regret it. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have chosen to tell you in the first. Daniel reached out and grabbed me, and I felt the coolness of his hand send into my heart. I should have buried all my feelings in my heart, Daniel. You have a long time ahead of you, and I'm just a few insignificant decades in your long life. Forget about me, Daniel. Daniel reached out and hugged me, choking back sobs. He kissed the butterfly birthmark on my shoulder. Late 18th century. I died in Daniel's arms. I was a gray-haired old man by then. And Daniel is still a young teenager. No one will ever know what happened to us. And then later, 1,000 years later. Times have changed. Daniel still lives in this town. Daniel was a famous pianist in town. His piano music is sought after by most couples in love. The town knows it. There's a very famous pianist in town. He had always lived alone. No one knows where he's from or how long he's been alive. In people's memory, as if he had always been young. At some later date, Daniel brought a little girl home from somewhere. That's a beautiful little girl. Big eyes and long, lush brown hair. Daniel took her to live and taught her to play the piano. The townspeople haven't seen much of this kid. By chance one day, it happened to see her sitting by the lake in town composing a song. The sun was beating down on her brown curls, with the wind blowing her hair. People saw the vivid butterfly birthmark on her shoulder. Daniel stood a little way off and called to her softly. Daniel took her hand and faded away. People realized there was a talented young songwriter in town. They heard Daniel call her Layla.